I'm Chris Eyre, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the AFI Movie Club and also to the AFI students. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to talk about movies. I know that we all love movies, and I've kind of made a specific study of Native Americans in movies. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And then I want to ask for some input, some questions from everybody out there, the students, as to this conversation. It's an interesting conversation. It really is. I started out by writing up some notes, and in the 126 or some years, 127 years of cinema, Native people have primarily been seen, and you can guess what I'm going to say, as nobles or as savages. And that still exists to this day. Not much has changed. So if you want to do something inventive, creative, you can really change that paradigm, because it shouldn't be that hard to change. What we're talking about is just merely putting Native people on screen in contemporary, progressive, dramatic tones, just like everybody else you see on network television, for that matter. But Native people have been stuck in this paradigm of politics, of Native American dysfunctional politics. It's said that film is a depiction of society and our views and values at the time. So you can take decade by decade and look at the movies with Native people in them, and they're a direct reflection of our consciousness or our thinking towards how we feel about Native American people politically in this country. Usually Native people are appropriated, like Last of the Mohicans has been made 5 times. If you remember the movie The Searchers, which is a brilliant movie for a filmmaker, but as a Native person, there's a great paradox in that it's so hateful towards Native people. And John Wayne is that person that's so atrocious towards Native people. I've had some different thinking about The Searchers in recent years, though, because, you kind of wondered, John Ford as the filmmaker, how much did he actually know he was drawing a character in John Wayne that was so over the top racist that he may have been trying to counter a specific point, which is that racism is wrong. So, in recent years, I've looked at that movie differently and wondered how much John Ford was potentially knowing what he was doing by creating such a character as John Wayne. But, interestingly enough, when people read about John Wayne today in something like his 1972 Playboy interview, I laugh about it, because I think Dave Chappelle quoted it recently. No, it was Bill Burr quoted it recently on Saturday Night Live a couple weekends ago, where he said, he was born in 1907. What do you expect? This guy was from the ilk and the society he was from. And so again, film is a depiction of our views and values at the time. And if you look at movies like Birth of a Nation, it follows suit. So I'm going to name some movies in the 126 years of Native people being in movies, and you can see how the consciousness of the public changes towards Native people. But it doesn't change a lot based on being nobles and savages, and based upon us being the vehicle for other people's political bents. Avatar is a great example. How many people have seen Avatar? Raise your hand. There we go. It's a movie about a world that is inhabited by blue tribal people, and there's a white savior that comes and helps the native people. Well, that's the same idea behind Dances with Wolves, which is Jonathan Dunbar joins the native people, and at the end of the movie, he decides to ride with them onward to their demise. They're going to be part of the genocide. You know, Jonathan Dunbar, Kevin Costner's character, says, I want to see the West before it's gone. See my background in the West? It's this notion that's in the movie Wild. It's in the movie Into the Wild. It's the idea that there's something out there down that road right there that we all want. And it's tied into the manifest destiny of this country, which is that this country was made for the colonizers, the settlers, to come over and to take it for themselves. And they had the right to do that through the Bible. That was the manifest destiny of this country. And it goes a little further than that, which is, if you know about Greek Roman tragedy, I have a theory that it's a little more perverse, that actually the death of Native people in film and television is romanticized, that it's actually a romantic notion that Native people die in movies. I'll never forget, after I made my first movie, Smoke Signals, I'd get these period pieces, these scripts, and I'd read the scripts. And at a certain point I said, let me guess what happens to the Native people in the end. Can you guess? They all die. And there's this ideology that's deeply perverse, that it is romantic that the Native people die. It's romanticized in movies that the Native people die, because they have to die in order for America to move forward, which is a complete perversion. You know, when you talk about young people that are Native that have the highest suicide rate of any Americans in this country and in Canada, you realize that this ideology that went decade after decade about people's self-worth may have had an impact. I always say that, you know, John Ford's Westerns with Native people that had no identity and no families and they were pure antagonists, I always say that John Ford's decades of movies that swept the world and millions of people saw them was the second most damaging thing to the Bible that Native people suffered in the 20th century, were John Ford movies. So, you know, I've studied this and gone through a lot of movies, and I have this list, but I'm just going to read to you a little bit about, you know, when I was thinking about all this. And I'm going to remind you a couple things. The great thing is that film and art is, you know, is for everyone. There's certainly a misappropriation of Native people in movies, and there always has been. But that doesn't mean that anybody can own the idea of Indianness or Native. It doesn't mean that you can't put a Native character in your script. It doesn't mean that you can't use that iconography for a political point, like it's always been done. It's just a matter of understanding the history of it and what it is you're trying to do. Don't believe everything you think. And that's a great stewardship of filmmaking and of art, which is, you know, we get so focused on what we think about things. And it's important to remember, don't believe everything you think when it comes to, you know, these ideas and ideologies. I just suggest that you be informed as you look at movies with Native people and you make movies that may have Native people in them. So I wrote this down, which is the concept of Indianness in America is highly subjective to oneself and to others. Traditional Native American culture exists in various degrees of seclusion today, of survival today, and of generational renewal or renaissance today, in which a lot of young Native people, after Standing Rock and American Indian movement, you know, they've risen again, and in this age of diversity. The concept of what is Indian is always amorphous, and it's an iconic value at the same time. I mean, if you look at Land O'Lakes butter, if you look at the word Manhattan, if you look at the word Wisconsin, these are all Indian iconic inputs and values that we have in our culture today, and they're all around us all the time. The mere nature of placing Native Americans in mass media is inherently political, based on the numeric minority of populace that Native American people represent in this country. We represent about 3 million people out of a country of 330 million. We represent 1% maybe of this populace. But the iconic value that Native people have is large. And it's large in mass media. Native people are never going to be exempt from mass media. It's the story of America. It's not going away. You know, people get mad about Westerns and Native people's image in those movies, and it's not ever going to go away. It's a staple of America and of American cinema and history too. You know, further, Native Americans are almost always used as a point of American reference to our history as Americans and as a national cultural barometer. It's a subjective idea between good versus bad, and it's all about the maker's point of view. You know, you'll see in the 100 years of Native people in movies that we go from savages and, you know, bad people to, you know, good people in the 60s, and then to people that everybody wants to be like later on. So this idea of, you know, the consciousness of the time is reflected in the movies, and you can go decade by decade and see all this stuff. In mass media, Native Americans are political icons for the propaganda of their creators, political statements at best. Seldom are Native Americans merely people within the tapestry of Americana, or are they portrayed very seldomly in contemporary terms. How often do we see like an Indian starring in a McDonald's commercial or a Walmart commercial? I'll never forget, not that we want to be, but I'll never forget that, you know, I remember I made a short film when I was at NYU, and a short film distributor said, "But how do you know they're Indians?" And I'm like, they're on a reservation and they have certain, you know, traits that are native inherently to me. And it was like getting slapped in the face, you know. It's like, how do you know that? Well, what do you want me to do? Should I put them in a headband or braids all the time? Which I've done, right? I mean, it's iconography. It's like Indian, got it, you know? And so it's really iconography. So, you know, when I say, you know, Native people aren't participating in mass media, you know, I don't think we'd want to be in a McDonald's commercial, but there's a normalcy to it that Native people don't have as an inclusion in this country in mass media. So, you know, if a Native person was in a McDonald's commercial with braids, people would probably lose their mind a little bit. They'd say, that's wrong. You know, they'd say, that's not cool, you know? You know, you're giving Native people bad health, you know, and diabetes and, you know, all these, you know, these horrible things. So if you did put a Native person in a McDonald's commercial, it's political because of our exemption as being anything but political tools in mass media. So basically, I'm not saying we want to be in McDonald's commercials, but funny enough, I mean, there's all sorts of inside jokes about Indians shop at Walmart, so we'd be the best representatives of of Walmart anyways. But I'm not advocating for either one of those things. The decision to write and to cast a Native American character in film, television, mass media is almost always propaganda and has more meaning and an acute level of persona than the average American when you talk about the same thing, extras and so on. Whether filmmakers use Native American as an antagonist evil or as a propagandist friend, cinema has always given us the unique understanding as we look backwards towards the national consciousness of the time and deliver popular and changing reflections of Americans' manifest destiny and thinking about how our country was made. So basically, it's a reflection of how our country was made decade by decade. Despite the efforts of genocide towards Native people on this land and in these United States of America, the tribes and their people have endured generation after generation as a living and changing culture. The important thing is that we're a changing culture. We change all the time like everybody else. We adapt all the time like everybody else. And then people have the tropes of casinos. And I always laughed about the casino Indians because there's this application that I see where you take the mafia, Italian mafia, and you take tribal people and you meld them together and you get people in the Hollywood Hills writing about casino Indians. That's the composite. It's like, oh, they're just mafia, Italian mafia people that have reservation land and made a casino. I can write that. But the specificity of the sensibility is what's missing because people don't understand, the Indianness, the sensibility of it. So, the highest compliment I can pay to a person, and any of you as filmmakers out there, is to call her or him a storyteller. And that's really true. In my movie Smoke Signals, Thomas Builds the Fire always closed his eyes and told this story. And, the storytellers are the ones that, make us think and take us somewhere. And I'm a proud filmmaker. I'm a proud storyteller. And I know that all of you are too, because you're thinking about these things. But, that's the highest compliment I can pay is to call somebody a storyteller. And I think the highest compliment I can pay to Native Americans in those stories is to say that we are living enigmas. It's important that we're living. And the other part is that we can't completely be defined. When you talk about 573 tribes, when you talk about different points of dislocation, different economics, different reservation systems, you have America that's complicated, and you have Native America that, like I said, has 575 different tribes with 5 different language bases, with different religion and different cultures and different ceremonies. And that's on top of being Americans. So to actually think that we can define Native people in movies, I think is a little bit of a misnomer. And it's one of the proudest things that I think we have is that we are living and we are eclectic and enigmatic. And so I just give you that, which is, there's no crime in portraying Native characters and Native people. It's just a matter of understanding, what tribe it is, where it came from, and what you want to say about it. So I don't dissuade anybody from putting Native people on screen. Matter of fact, I love it. But I just think you have to be a little bit more informed than generations past on what it is and why. So let's look at some clips here. These are kind of interesting and kind of funny. Like I said, in 1894, one of the very first subjects of the moving image with Thomas Edison, when he had the kinetoscope in Times Square for a penny, he had gone to New Mexico and filmed the Laguna Pueblo doing the buffalo dance. You get to see, the old people, and maybe there's a paradox there, which is, this is appropriated, and what is it that is somebody taking? But there's also a value, which is you get to see, the physique of these old people. You get to see the faces of these old people. It's priceless in a certain way. And there's some of these other movies of the 20th century that are priceless just for that reason, that you get to go and see these people that were called the Vanishing Race. So that's one of the very first moving images from 1894, where Native people were the subjects. And in the 126 years of movies, we haven't changed much in the movies. In 126 years, we're still in the Stone Age of representation. And we were some of the very first subjects. And it's because we didn't control our image. Other people controlled our image, which still happens to this day. In 1898, there was a movie called Serving Rations to the Indians. How do you like that title? Like I said, it's about the consciousness of the time, which is this was probably a liberal movie that just wanted to portray we're supporting Native people in this country because they're the vanishing race. And that's where Native people got rations, which were flour and lard and meat at the forts. In 1914, there was an Edward Curtis movie called In the Land of the Headhunters. Edward Curtis was the photographer that went around the Americas and shot some 40,000 photographs of Native people. You see Chief Joseph and Sitting Bull and, these books of Native people that are in what's called sepia. It was really more of a brown than it was an orange sepia. But this was a movie that Edward Curtis made in 1914. It was the Salish people in the Northwest. And again, if you look at this, you can see that, it's real people, but it's always appropriated. It's romanticized, and it's directed by Edward Curtis, who very much thought that Native people were going to be gone, vanished. And his effort was to photograph and make movies about Native people before we were, in fact, completely gone. I'm going to go to 1939. And this was the first John Ford, John Wayne collaboration. And you've probably heard of this movie, which is Stagecoach. It really encapsulates the whole idea, which is these Native people are the antagonists. They come from nowhere. They have no culture. They have no families in this movie. And they're spit upon in terms of being the others for the wayward expansion of America. And so what happens in this movie is you can see the patriotism in this movie, which is the Indians are attacking, and basically they're shooting the Indians like the buffalo. And not once does one of the Native people say, hey, if we want to stop the stagecoach, we should just shoot the horses. It's kind of like, buffoonery, which is like, wait a minute, I thought these Native people lived out here, And interestingly enough, the screen direction famously changes, which is, it's going this way at one point and then it flips this way. But there's a lot of stories about Stagecoach, and it's the first collaboration between John Wayne and John Ford. And it really encapsulates the idea that Native people are the antagonists, preventing America from becoming what she needs to become.
Can we pop in a question from one of the students?
Yeah.
All right, Kiri. Kiri has a question.
Thanks. Thank you for being here, Chris. So I just have really quick questions. So as a mixed race Black person with like family who claim Native American heritage and hold it really dearly, from South Carolina, I'm curious with your Walmart example and your McDonald's example, you know, like they who, you know, again, it's maybe imagined, maybe it's real, we don't know yet, would feel like it was sacrilege, right? If there was that kind of representation, because for them, the land is soaked in blood and it's because of capitalism. So that it creates an inherent conflict. And I'm just curious to know a little bit more about how you feel about that.
Well, like I said, I don't think there's any one Native person. Like I said, with 575 tribes, I think it would be a disservice to all of us to say this is what Indian is. That's what I mean by it's amorphous. It's not so much as myself saying this person's not Native or somebody saying I'm not Native. It's highly subjective also. And it doesn't mean that there's not traditional Native people in America that are more secluded in their practice and belief. But all I'm suggesting is that I'm very proud of the fact that we are identifying what Native is, because you know in California it might be you know people of the Tules, and in the Northern Plains it's people of the headdress, and the Longhouse in the Northwest, and so we can't identify exactly what this is, and I think that speaks to the community of Native America, which is really what the concept's about. It's about all of us when you talk about a tribe. I mean, tribalism has really gotten a bad kind of rap recently in politics, you know, tribalism. But, you know, tribalism is about community and about supporting the young and the old. It had been traditionally. And so basically, I don't know if I'm answering your question well, but I think it's that whole mosaic. And that's one of the proudest points I think about, you know, being Native, is that as Native people, we learn about other Native people all the time.
And do you think that they need to be Native behind the camera to have the kind of like insight? I mean, like Chloe Zhao is a great example of a filmmaker who did really like insightful and great films. Yeah. I'm curious, and Julie Dash has like an interracial relationship between a Native American man and a Black woman in her film Daughters of the Dust. I'm just curious to get your take on those kinds of depictions that don't necessarily have a person who's Native American behind the camera.
Well, I mean, there's two folds to that. One fold is, again, it's a reflection of America's belief about what Native America is. And I mean, if you look at Dances with Wolves, that's valuable, because in Dances with Wolves, it's the Northern Plains headdress, horse and feather people that are romanticized. And Jonathan Dunbar suggests he would have done the right thing. He would have traveled with them past that point and went and become, you know, a subject of the government and annihilated with them. So on one fold, it's about, if non-Native people portray Native people, it's valuable to us understanding, I think, the consciousness of the time and how we're being used politically. On the other hand, I would never suggest that, I don't believe in censorship. So I would never suggest that an artist doesn't have the right to portray what they want to portray. You know, that would be the same as gender, which is, you know, that female filmmakers can't portray, you know, males accurately, which is just a complete, you know, misnomer of art. It's a misnomer of humanity. And so, you know, there's a lot of good things that people have done for Native people in cinema. And one in particular, this is all about paradoxes, is Dances with Wolves again. which when that movie happened in the 90s, it spawned so many Native people going to Hollywood, from people like Wes Studi and Graham Greene, Tantu Cardinal, Zon McLaren, Kimberly Norris, all sorts of people exploded in the early 90s because they said, hey, I'm a Native person and I can do that. And they did that. And so these things have great paradoxes to them. But I would never suggest that only a Native person can portray Native content. I think it's too limited. You know, I mean, we're also artists.
Thank you so much, Chris, for being here today. I loved your movies, and I'm really honored that you are speaking with us today. I have a question kind of in this vein of what advice or cautionary words or any sort of thoughts you might have to filmmakers portraying, you know, a gender or a people's or a community or a race that is outside of what they grew up in. Do you have any thoughts about how to do that well?
Not how to do it well.
Rather how not to do it poorly.
Yeah, I mean, I've been you know there where you know you're not quite kind of sure what the line is. And as a Native person, you know, I've portrayed other tribes. Is that my right to actually, you know, portray other tribes? I mean, what are the boundaries here? You know, I've been told by an elder from another tribe we wouldn't do that. And as the filmmaker, I'm saying, well, wait a minute. This is about people that were actually enacting blood law, meaning they were killing each other within the tribe. And I said, this elder's telling me that out of respect, they wouldn't have argued. And I have to make a decision as a filmmaker, which is, number one, dramatically what I need to work. Number two, is that plausible that culturally these people that were actually fighting and killing one another wouldn't have talked over one another in the heat of the moment? I mean, that's what drama's about, is where people do things they're not supposed to do. And so basically, I listen to elders and I listen to advisors and people when it's not my tribe, and even when it is. And I had to agree with myself and say, I know for a fact people talked over each other. And so, you know, anybody giving you permission is not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is what you can own. You know, so I mean, you have to be able to own, you know, what you put out there. I mean, there was another case where I got really excited because I was doing a project for PBS, and it was on the Cherokee, and Wes Studi, the actor, was playing Major Ridge, who was a Cherokee that owned slaves. You know, some of the Cherokees had affluence and wealth, and they owned slaves in the 1830s. And Wes Studi, as a Cherokee, you know, first language speaker, I pulled Wes aside. I said, hey, I know for a fact if Major Ridge, you know, owned slaves, which is a whole nother conversation, that he spoke in Cherokee to them. And filmically, I'm thinking, I've never seen this in a movie where a Native American is speaking an indigenous language to an African American. And so we developed that a little bit. And he did that. And you're going, that's never been done, I guarantee you, in a movie. And those are the things where you don't ask for permission, but you have to own it as the filmmaker. You have to own, you know, what you know. You know, there have been times when I think I shouldn't have done that. You know, I shouldn't have put that out like that because, you know, I went too far with something. Especially when there's such limited images of you know, Native people. I mean, you know, take a if there's a Native person on screen drinking, you know, are you doing that a service or a disservice? It might be part of the story, it might have some truth to it for that specific character, but are you actually doing a stereotypical damage? And how much of that do you do? I mean, I had an extra in a window that was swaying once, and the AD said, you know, he doesn't look like he's really intoxicated. And I said, what the hell do you want me to do, man? I mean, do you want him to be falling over and stuff? I mean, he's swaying, man. You know, it's a matter of degrees, and you have to own it. And sometimes you go, okay, you know, that's it. You know, it's like, that's it. I'm cooking. You know, I'm just putting pinches in here and there. But as long as you can own it, you know, you can do it. And so, you know, with Zoe, who's, you know, a friend of mine and, you know, great filmmaker, we're making ideas here for the public consumption. And, you know, she can own what she does. I mean, she's owning what she does. It doesn't mean that people agree or disagree. It's the fact that you're the storyteller. And so if you can own it, you can have it. And maybe, you know, you'll get in trouble for it. But I appreciate the people that can own it, you know, same as performers. The Searchers is 1956. And, you know, again, these paradoxes exist, which is The Searchers is a brilliant movie. We all learned about The Searchers in film school. And I'm developing a project right now. And, you know, 20 years ago when I was in film school, they talked about doorways and windows in The Searchers, and this negative space, you know, this negative black space. And it stuck with me to the point where, you know, I remember, you know, Kurosawa and John Ford and Howard Hawks, just like a lot of you. And, you know, doorways and windows were the things that stuck with me in The Searchers. And so you pick these elements of The Searchers and you go, you know, it's really great stuff and you can take it and learn from it. But then there's also crazy stuff in it like this. That's John Wayne's persona as a patriot. He's doing his job in, you know, Wayward Expansion, which is not letting a dead person rest. He's actually malicious enough that he's trying to prevent a dead person from going to the spirit world, which is like, huh, this guy really hates these Indians. So, you know, that's the kind of alienation that people never even thought about when they watched what was being presented to them of Indians in movies. The alienation they never even considered. It was just normal fare. And I would suggest that this bigotry had an effect on generations of Native youth and their self-image and their self-pride. So it's kind of an interesting history. Let's look at a clip from the 1961 Exiles. This is actually a kind of a documentary movie that is actually real people living in the Bay Area because of relocation, which was a sign of the times, where Native people were transported to cities so they could integrate and the government wouldn't have to support them on reservations. And so basically this is an interesting movie because it's literally a documentary of this community of Native people from all different nations that have band together in the Bay Area.
I don't remember much when I was a child, after my mother died or even before. But right now it isn't so bad as when I was a child. And I've always wanted to go get away from my people there and all that, and go someplace where somebody will maybe make me feel different, be happier.
Hey, Chris, thanks for speaking with us. Been a big fan for a while. When I first saw Smoke Signals, so I'm actually from Coeur d'Alene, so I've been around that area quite a bit, so I loved that movie, and it was amazing to see everything that I'd seen growing up around there represented in a film, and I can only imagine for young natives how that must have felt for them as well to see that represented in a film. I think, like you're talking about, it's always political, but it can always when something's put into a movie and given that opportunity, it feels like it's been been valued, and I think that's pretty amazing. And I was thinking about The Searchers, and I realized that even though I grew up in a community with lots of Native Americans around, I didn't realize how wrong that can be until I got to college and started studying film in college, and like kind of became aware of what representation means in film, and realized that like some of the Western scripts that I was writing as a college freshman, I realized how wrong-headed they were, even though I'd grown up around Native people and seen them in, like you said, everyday scenarios. So I was wondering if you have any tips on how to like share that consciousness with more people and more young filmmakers, so that they don't step in, because we've been watching these movies for decades and step in the same representation pitfalls that John Ford did and whatnot. So how can we help share that with more young people who want to tell stories involving Native American characters?
I think simply it's just a matter of identifying, yourself as other people. I mean, I guess that's what we do best in the movies, is we, empathize with other people. I watched, believe it or not, I watched Dallas Buyers Club for the first time during the pandemic. And I was shocked how much I really loved it. And I really enjoyed, empathizing with Jared Leno's character, and Matthew McConaughey's, and that's really what it's about. Is you write real people. If you don't know these people, then I would suggest you don't write them. But you grew up in Coeur d'Alene, and you have sensibility, and so basically it's just a matter of like I said, it's not that Native people can't be antagonists, but at least understand where that's come from and the paradigm and what you're doing. So I would just suggest you write characters that are real and people can empathize and are three-dimensional, like the people that you've known. And that's really the best you can do, which is my movie Smoke Signals, which I didn't write. When I read the book, they were three-dimensional characters, and I fell in love with them. And so I just, suggest that if you write Native characters, write them, with an informed understanding, and love them, love your characters. So this is probably the most famous Native content movie of all time, which is Dances with Wolves. And we all love Dances with Wolves, because it's entertainment, man. I mean, there's an American element to it that we all grew up in Americana, watching, The Lone Ranger and Tonto, for that matter. And watching Will Sampson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and watching Chief Dan George and Little Big Man. And as much as they're American movies by non-Native directors, you still applaud the Indians, When you see Will Sampson, you go, wow, look at that guy. And you root for him just because of the exemption of Native characters you see on screen. When you see Chief Dan George making all these jokes that you can't help but think aren't his own jokes in that movie, because they're so Indian centric, you think, I don't think none wrote those lines. I think he's coming up with a lot of those lines. And so you cheer for them. And so that's the paradox. So even in something like Dances with Wolves, I have a friend who's Lakota, and he speaks Lakota, and he says this line sometimes when we're, out and about and having a good time and laughing. He'll do this dramatically, kind of with tears in his eyes, like wind in his hair here. And he says, I'm your friend, I'm your friend. And, we get a big laugh out of it. But there's a great paradox here. I mean, we love seeing Indians on screen, even though some of these portrayals aren't as realistic as we probably want them. So everybody knows that Kevin Costner rides off with the Indians to suffer appropriately for tribal people because he's fallen in love with a white woman who was taken care of by tribal people. But it's a sign of the consciousness of our time, which is, if we were around in the 1870s, I think that movie takes place, we would have all gone with the Indians. We would have done the right thing. We would have, lived with the Indians, and we would have seen the error of the manifest destiny way. That's what the consciousness is about. And so if you've never had a Lakota friend yell at you, I'm your friend, you should try it sometime. It's really gets you here somewhere. But Dances with Wolves is a great paradox. I mean, there's a lot of great things in that movie that are just what we do, which is entertainment, which is great entertainment. But it's not, real Indian people told by Indian people. If you look at the end of the movie Thunderheart, again, Val Kilmer, who's wonderful, and so is Kevin Costner, he yells, "This land is not for sale." And he means that this native land is not for sale by these corporations. And so again, it's that non-native person suffering for native people and bringing the native plight to the masses. So speaking of Thunderheart, John Trudell was the leader of the American Indian movement. He had 18,000 pages of surveillance done on him by the FBI. He's really a non-performer, but he acted in several movies. And John was just so true to Indian culture and for the pride of Native people. So this is John Trudell in this movie with Val Kilmer in the scene, and he's a non-native. And I can't help but think that John didn't also help on these lines because of the ideology that he's able to weave into this.
Oh, you gotta get out of here.
I belong here. Why aren't you at Red Deer Table like old man says?
What is the big deal about that place? Can't I get a straight answer around here?
It's a power deal. Fast Elk found out, so they killed him.
Well, they're gonna kill you if you stay here now. Come on, let's go.
Well, sometimes they have to kill us. They have to kill us. Because they can't break our spirit.
It's wonderful to see John Trudell in that role. And he says, there's a way to live with Earth and a way not to. We choose the way of the Earth. And I can't help but think that he's, complementing that dialogue with its own improvisation. And then Michael Apted, the great director, allowed some of that because it's very John Trudell, who was an activist. He's passed since then. So let's play Smoke Signals from 1998, which is my film, my first feature. And this is, like I said, storytellers. So Thomas Builds the Fire is the storyteller in this, and he closes his eyes and you're not sure if he's actually telling lies or if he's telling the truth about his visions and what he sees.
Tell me what happened, Thomas. Tell me what's going to happen.
How do we forgive our fathers? Maybe in a dream. Do we forgive our fathers for leaving us too often or forever? when we were little. Maybe for scaring us with unexpected rage, or making us nervous because there never seemed to be any rage there at all. Do we forgive our fathers for marrying or not marrying our mothers? For divorcing or not divorcing our mothers? And shall we forgive them for their excesses of warmth or coldness? Shall we forgive them for pushing or leaning, for shutting doors, for speaking through walls, or never speaking, or never being silent?
I think when people ask about, Native people in movies, Thomas Builds the Fire represents a three-dimensional character and someone that you can identify with and that you actually can embrace. So again, I think it's about, making something that's universal. I mean, we all have fathers, right? And that transcends all this talk about Indian and Native. The last clip I'm going to play is from 2017. It's from the movie Hostels by Scott Cooper with Christian Bale. And I think they did a fabulous job with this movie because it's about finding the universal truths. And I think as we talk about all this history, we still haven't found, our truth with this relationship between Indian country and America. There's still quite a bit of unfinished business, and that's where I think the movies reflect, that history, which is sometimes messy. So this is Hostels from 2017, and it's a great scene where these two men that are caught up in the wheel of history try and find some mutual understanding.
Well, enough. Billy Dixon. Enough. Tully McLean. Enough. Edwin Tate. Wa.
No, Hopper. Nice to see. Howane.
Bébé, c'est yo. C'est me. Aho, do.
These are some great movies. You can see by the emotion and the sentiment. And I suggest you go back and watch all of these movies. People are trying to work it out, I mean, basically, when it comes to the relationship between Native America and America, it's still one of those things that's unresolved, so to speak. And movies really reflect that. They're usually told by non-Native people. And I hope that everybody here will support Native filmmakers telling their own stories. That's what I've been involved in for the past 20 years and trying to do, because I think that self-representation of Native people in cinema is one of the last frontiers left. We have Italian cinema and Japanese cinema and so on that's been composited here in America, but we really haven't heard Native and Indigenous voices in the 126 years to the disproportionate degree that other people have told Native stories. And so it's not a matter of, is there one or the other? It's a matter of, I think we just need to balance that paradigm of story, just so we have both sides of that equation a little bit more.
Can I bring in a
Yeah.
question? Anthony.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for being here. This means a lot to me. I love that you're having this conversation and other people are hearing it because, there's just crazy stuff. Like I'm actually in the process of getting ready to apply for the Indigenous program at Sundance. And I had another filmmaker tell me, yeah, you need to dye your hair black again. And I'm like, what is, it's crazy. It's crazy stuff. And I also started as an actor and I saw the other side of it. I saw, I saw crazy stuff. People just getting casted because they're like Filipino and, and all that. But the one thing I wanted to say really quick was I actually was on a Sundance Zoom where Chloe Zhao was speaking because she's come up before. And yeah. I think she really said it. I think she really hit the nail on the head with this. And, not everybody's going to agree, but when she goes to cast, when she goes to tell stories on a reservation, what she said was, when she goes to talk to them, that they immediately get into the stereotypical Native representation mode because that's what they're expected to do. And what she says is she wants to hear what you ate for breakfast. And that's very refreshing to me because as a filmmaker, I realize that I have a reason to be telling these stories. It's a social reason for me. It's and to be giving and to be bringing these people to life so that they're not playing these characters in these cardboard cutouts. Because I'd always tell my uncle, I'd say, every time you see a movie, it's like the historical version, or it's like there's a murder on the res and like the FBI detective, white detective comes in to save the day. And like, that's it. And then my uncle would always say, he'd say, but then you have smoke signals. And there's other movies too, but like your movie was probably one of the first ones to show Native Americans, like Native res life, how it is. And I just wanted to thank you for that. So I didn't really have much of a question, but more to just express my gratitude because this is like at AFI, man, it's amazing. So thank you.
Awesome.
Kind of going off of what Anthony just said about movies are usually about like the historical aspect or a period piece. How would you like to see modern movies, sort of like how Smoke Signals was a modern movie at the time? How would you like to see Natives represented in present day?
I'd like to see them represented eclectically. I don't know, any two natives that are the same from the same tribe. I want to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to see all the idiosyncrasies and triumphs of progressive and funny Native people. It's an Americana that we don't see. And with the iconography of Native people in mass media over the 126 years, it's a shame that we don't have real Native people always playing Native characters and showing us what that is. So basically, I would like to see eclectic. And I would like to see it driven by Indigenous and Native American writers, directors, and producers. And it's happening. It's slowly happening. When I made Smoke Signals 20 years ago, people said, okay, there's going to be a Native American cinema that comes onto the scene. And, it's still the only national theatrical release, directed by and produced and written by tribally enrolled Native American people in this country. And, that's in 2020, which is just kind of mind-boggling that in the 126 years of movies, we haven't moved the dial much more than the same tropes that we see time after time with Native people still being in the Stone Age in terms of, their representation. And that's primarily because in my mind, it's written by non-native people. So what I'd like to see, whether it's, first native people and indigenous people portraying ourselves, I would just like to see the eclectic. I would like to see the funny. I would like to see the zombie, the native zombie, the native natives in space, So it's a matter of, I just want to see the full array of what native people can be. And that's kind of the goal. And the fact that we're not invisible like we've been in the past. Just support native filmmakers, indigenous filmmakers. And if you can own native content, it's art, man. You just go do it, There's no censorship, we're artists. And like I said, the highest compliment I can pay all of you is your storytellers. And stories change the world. They will change the world. And I know that from my first movie, Smoke Signals, which is, it's just about a boy and his father. And the number of people that movie touched in that universal way transcended the fact that it was a Native American-esque movie. And so all my respect to you guys as storytellers, and I'm sure I'll see your work, and I'll see your work with native characters, and I'll say, oh my God, that's really great, So best wishes to everybody, and stay safe and healthy and happy and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Chris. You are the master storyteller. We are applauding you.
Yeah.